Chapter 11, Harvard. As part of my continuing education and David Melnick's strategy to shape me into an effective CEO, David recommended that I attend the Owners and Presidents Management course, OPM, at Harvard. The OPM course is essentially a high-level accelerated management program offered primarily to accomplished business owners and presidents. It is given in 3 one-month semesters over a 3-year period and requires 1 month in residence at Harvard for each of the 3 years. There were about 140 students in the class. Everyone was virtually handpicked because enrollment is limited to only a few executives from each business and professional category. There were 2 or 3 lawyers, 2 or 3 accountants, a couple from each of the different manufacturing, financial, investment, and retail sectors. As I recall, I was the only person from the retail, fashion, and manufacturing industry. The class was a very well-rounded community of senior business leaders. As with the AMA President's Course, most of the participants were experienced business executives. There was a lot of accumulated knowledge in the class. Again, this was another intimidating experience for me. I felt out of my depth and overwhelmed by my classmates. However, I looked on the course as a serious investment both in money and in time. I was there to learn as much as I possibly could, and I intended to get my money's worth and maximize my return for the time I was spending away from my home and business. Much of the course was based on the case method, and each day we studied a number of business cases. I kept wondering if I was getting anything out of it. There was so much to read and learn. I felt I could not absorb it all, and that some of it was beyond me. However, after each semester, when I returned to my business and my life at home, I was both surprised and gratified to discover how much I had learned and retained and was able to apply to my business. There was one particular episode that was especially exciting and memorable. The business game. Towards the end of the second semester, we began to hear occasional references to a business game, a 4-day competition at the end of the third and final semester. As I understood it, the purpose of the game was to test our abilities to apply virtually everything we had learned over our 3 semesters. The game itself was a computerized business model using a complicated business simulation program involving in-depth analysis and interpretation of massive amounts of information along with extensive background reading. Based on their analyses, teams of 4 would adopt strategies, make business decisions, and input data into the computer for a specific time frame. All the teams were competing with each other in the same market. I was totally intimidated by the prospect of having to play the game from the first moment I heard of it. My strengths are in buying and selling ladies' clothing. I am a fashion retailer. I am not a mathematical person, nor am I a strong reader. Also, I had never even touched a computer. The thought of spending my last 4 days at Harvard involved in a competitive computer game that was beyond me was terrifying. I was convinced I would not be able to participate effectively in the game, and I saw it as a humiliating way for me to end my days at Harvard. I lived through the last 1.5 semesters haunted by that specter, and my sense of dread increased exponentially as the game day approached. When competition day came, the class was divided into 35 teams of 4. Each team was selected randomly by computer and was identified by a number only. The names of the participants on each team were not identified, so each player knew only what team he/she was on and his/her 3 teammates, but they did not know who was on any other teams. I was on team number 7. I was intimidated, and that was my state of mind when Team 7 first got together as a group. It was also the state of mind from which I judged myself and my teammates. I knew I was incompetent, and I was hoping I would be able to ride inconspicuously on my teammates' coattails. I knew the other members of my team only by having seen them in class, and from what I observed, it was clear that this was not going to happen. One team member was a headhunter who I thought looked and spoke like a football player. I saw nothing about him that made me feel confident he would make any contribution, so I wrote him off. Another member was an engineer with a speech impediment and a perpetually disheveled look about him. I could not understand anything he said, and because of the image he presented, I did not want to hear anything he had to say. Another write-off. Our fourth teammate was a mystery man who, as far as I could tell, had paid his tuition just so he could say he had gone to Harvard. He rarely attended classes, he stayed out most of the night, and he barely participated in class when he was there. Total write-off. And then there was me. We were in trouble right from the get-go. The first thing we had to do as a team was to choose a leader. I wanted to hide out. The last thing I wanted was to be the leader of any team, especially this team, in a game that I thought was beyond me. But they chose me as leader anyway, and there I was. The game was played using the model of mid-sized companies in the business of manufacturing and selling widgets. All the teams were competing in the same market, and we were all given the same information every quarter. That information included all the data such a company would need to plan strategies and make and execute effective decisions. It also included such things as economic trends and projections, size of market, manufacturing costs, labor availability and costs, time frame to manufacture, availability and cost of financing, and much more. There were also numerous penalties for inefficiencies, such as manufacturing more inventory than could be sold and for excess financing, etc. The business simulation covered a 4-year period, 16 quarters, with each of our days counting as 1 year. So each day we played 4 quarters. At the beginning of each quarter, we were given our own operating results for the last quarter, the operating results of all the other teams by number, and the updated economic data for the next quarter. At the beginning of each quarter, based on our operating results to date, the operating results of all the other teams, and our projections for the future, we entered our strategies for the next quarter into the computer. Those strategies were then evaluated by the computer, and the associated results were generated and published, so we all knew how every team was doing at the end of each quarter. We were competing in 3 categories: highest profit, largest market share, and highest return on equity. And so the game began. Our team started the first quarter like a performance of the Three Stooges, and I say 3 because our fourth teammate, the mystery man, was not there to participate. I was the leader, and I didn't have a clue where to begin. I was not able to get through reading all the information we had to cover, and even at that, I did not understand much of the data I did cover. The football player started the computer and began typing and talking a blue streak. I was so overwhelmed I could not internalize what he was saying. Meanwhile, our disheveled engineer was talking about some of the background material we had been given, but I couldn't make sense of what he was talking about. We were getting nowhere, and time for entering our moves for the first quarter was running out. We had to put something into the computer, so my two teammates collaborated and just entered some moves without any input from me. Shortly after the deadline for data input, the operating results of the first quarter were posted. Some teams had made as much as $500,000, others made less, a few broke even, and some lost money. Team 7, my team, lost $500,000 and stood 35th out of 35 teams. The three of us were depressed and visibly upset. We had nothing to say to each other. What could we say? We were looking at a disaster, and it seemed there was nothing we could do to make things better. The second quarter emulated the first, and we lost another $350,000. At lunchtime, I couldn't stand being with my teammates any longer, so I went to lunch with some friends from the class and complained to them about the situation I was in. I did not know how I was going to survive another 3.5 days of this torture. On my way out of the cafeteria, I met my professor and complained to him about our inability to participate in the game. He just dismissed me with, "Max, you'll do okay," and he turned and walked away. I decided I had had enough, and I went back to my room, intending to stay there and hide out all afternoon. In fact, I had decided to stay there for the next 3 days. I could not continue to subject myself to that much humiliation. While I was in my room, I absent-mindedly picked up the binder that had been given to us when we first arrived, containing profiles of all the people registered in the course. I casually opened it, and as my guardian angel would have it, flipped to the page with the picture and profile of my football player teammate. I read his profile and was amazed to learn that as a hobby he developed computer software, so obviously he was some kind of a computer whiz. I then looked at my other teammates' profiles and learned that our disheveled engineer was a distinguished scientist and mathematician with a list of degrees as long as my arm. I immediately went back to our meeting room and confronted my two teammates with their profiles. I asked the football player why he hadn't told me about his abilities with the computer. He said that he had tried to talk to me, but that I wasn't listening. Then I asked our engineer why he hadn't told me of his experience and background. He too said he had tried, but that I wouldn't listen. I was quiet for a while, then I said, "Well, I'm listening now." I then asked the football player, "Do you understand how to play this game on the computer?" "Absolutely." I then asked the engineer, "Can you absorb and analyze all the information and interpret it for me?" "For sure." Then I said, "I don't know how to use the computer, and I can't read all the background stuff, but the business of projecting, planning, manufacturing, and selling widgets is right up my alley. I've been making decisions like these for years. It's my area of expertise. If you, the engineer, can interpret the data for me, I will call the moves, and if you, the football player, put the moves into the computer, we may be able to turn this thing around." And suddenly, we were a team. We started our third quarter $850,000 in the red, while some other teams were already over $1 million in the black. We had also used up much of our strategizing time between the second and third quarters getting our act together, so we had to make some hasty decisions for the third quarter, and we were only able to break even in that quarter. For the fourth quarter, our engineer was fabulous. He pulled out his slide ruler, and not only did he interpret the information for me, he also gave me what-if scenarios so I could understand the implications and dollar potential of our moves. Capitalizing on this support, I developed the strategies and recommended all future moves. In the fourth quarter, we made money. We made even more in the fifth, sixth, and seventh quarters, and picked up some ground on the other teams. We continued moving ahead steadily, but by the time we reached the 12th quarter, we were still far behind the leaders. On the morning of the last day, I approached my teammates and said to them, "Coming third or even second really means nothing. The object of this game is to win. You either come first or you lose. I would like to try to win this game." So the three of us sat down and worked out what we thought would be a winning strategy. I knew that in order to close the gap, we had to make some very aggressive moves. We could see that the leading teams were being cautious. The economic projections for the next 4 quarters were very strong and demand could be high, but no one appeared to be building an inventory. I believed that the key to achieving maximum results was to build inventory, and I thought our competitors were going to run out of stock. If I was right, we had to gear up, bring on more staff, buy the necessary raw materials, and do it immediately. There was a risk involved, but I knew that without sufficient product, we could not achieve the sales levels and returns we needed. So I planned our inventory aggressively to meet the anticipated increased demand. In the last 2 quarters, the economy was good. Demand was high. We had inventory and our competitors did not. We made our moves, then the game was over. The results were issued for the 14th quarter, but not for the last 2 quarters. By the end of the day, we had no idea what the final result of the game would be. The next morning, the class met in the assembly hall to hear the results of the game. The professors who had designed the game and were responsible for adjudicating the results came into the hall with 3 bottles of champagne, one for the winning team in each of the 3 categories. One of the professors announced that more often than not, a different team won each category. On rare occasions, one team won in 2 categories. However, having one team win in all 3 categories was unprecedented. Then he announced that team number 7 had won in all 3 categories. No one knew who the players were on Team 7, so when the 4 of us came forward and took all 3 bottles of champagne, there was silence at first, then there was an explosion of applause and cheers. Later, some of my classmates accused me of setting them up, given my whining and complaining on day 1. At dinner that evening, we opened all 3 bottles of champagne and shared it with everyone. We were heroes. As it turned out, this game was right up my alley. Planning, projecting, manufacturing, and selling was what I did, and I had exactly the kind of support I needed for what I could not do. Given my scholastic background, it was a tremendous accomplishment for me to attend and be a graduate of the Harvard Business School. It was even more meaningful to me to have been a part of the team that won that prestigious business game. It was a terrific high for me and a wonderful way to end my Harvard experience. I learned some very important things about myself by participating in that business game. I learned that I was inclined to make unwarranted snap assumptions about people. I was too quick to judge. I jumped to conclusions about people without having adequate information, and I wrote them off. Also, when I was frustrated, I was not a good listener, and I was not approachable. Understanding this forced me to acknowledge that I had to make some fundamental changes in my behavior, and over time I was able to change my behaviors and interactions with people and better able to work with and empower them. I became an effective leader. More important, I learnt the power of team. Except for our mystery man, every one of us on that team brought something different to the table, and when we put what we had together and all pulled together in the same direction, we were unbeatable. That experience contributed to my becoming passionate about and totally committed to team as being the #1 key success factor in our organization.